Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Uh, I hope you are all fine, happy, open mind with the new learning. Uh, Today I'm going to talk about two things. The first of these two is your projects in this course, and the second we shall be starting discussing approaches for machine translation development issues and challenges. And today I shall talk about one approach with its different categories, that is rule-based machine translation approach, or RBMT in short. So let's start with your projects for this course. In this part of the presentation we have A, B, C and D. In A, of course, the introduction of an online MT system. B, selection of a translated text. And C is the comparison and analysis. And then D, I shall explain about the presentation and the written docs to be given to your teacher. In A part, an introduction of an online MT system, I have selected these 6 online MT systems: Sistran, Bing Translation, Reverso, Babylon, Bubblefish and Yandex. The allocation, because there are 6 students in the class, so allocation of systems to the students will be done when I come to see you people on Tuesday, inshallah. Suggested format for introduction, because I'm asking you to introduce your allocated system, which will be allocated tomorrow inshallah. So I'm asking you to introduce this system, and I'm also suggesting a format for introduction. These are suggested elements. You can include, of course, more information, more relevant things. So the number 1 is the company intro, or maybe when the company was established, or when company started its work, in which area, and then that particular translation online translation system, when it was established, number of languages available on this system. Is Arabic and English available? I think this question is now irrelevant because I have in the end selected those 6 online MT systems where, of course, Arabic English is available. Modes and MT services. By mode, I'm talking about text to text translation, speech to text translation, and vice versa, speech to speech translation, and so on. Other services. By other services, do they provide human translation services as well? Do they provide translation solutions for different businesses? Do they provide some CAD tool also to the business or individuals or translation agencies? And as I said, any other relevant information which you would like to include in the introduction of that particular MT system. And last but not the least is the approach used for the development, because this part is very, very important. And of course, technicalities are not included in your introduction, but you will tell us how this system was developed in its initial stages, and then how the developers changed the approaches throughout the years, and now which approach is used for the development and functioning of this system. The B part, which is the next phase of your project, is the selection of a translated text, and in this phase you will select a translated text from already translated by human translator or translators, from a book, from an article, from the internet, wherever the sources are open to you, and you can select a text between these four languages, English, Arabic, vice versa, Arabic, Urdu, vice versa, or Urdu, English, vice versa, or Thai with these three languages. At least 700 words. Your text should contain at least 700 words, that because this size of the text shall provide you an ample opportunity, will give you good examples for your next phase, which is comparison and analysis. Introduction of the text. So there is another suggestion related to the format, that your introduction may include these things: when the text was written, and the context or the background for writing that particular text, the original text. Intro of the author: who is the author, his name, his area, his era, his other works, his contribution in an academic or other fields. What is the theme of the selected text, and what is the text type, with a quick discourse analysis. Is the text written in a simple way, simple sentences, the vocabulary, sentence structure, and this text is the writer is also using culturally bound expressions, or historical references, or cultural references, or literary references, and so on and so forth. And who is the publisher, or the platform from where the original text has been published, book form or electronically published, whatever, or the country, etc., or any other relevant information which you would like to include in this part, in the introduction of the original text. Then you will be introducing the translation, the translated text, when it was translated, and by whom, name of the translator, brief introduction of the translator, his area of specialization or interest or era, his contribution in his translational contribution also, or other works maybe, or why he is, if he is very famous writer or translator, so why, in which area, the translation style, the type of translation: is it word for word translation, is it sense for sense translation, is it adaptation, is it communicative, is it semantic, is it so on and so forth. In your opinion, what strategies have been adopted by the translator to translate this particular text, and the publisher, where it was published, and country, etc., and again any other relevant information which is very helpful for the reader, in your opinion. C is the comparison and analysis. Of course, after doing all that, you will come to this very important phase of your project, is you get the translation from the selected empty system. You have already selected original text. You have, of course, selected that text which is already translated, and in the introduction you have given all these background information. Now you will get your selected text translated from your selected empty system. For example, if your system is Reverso, so you will get your text translated from Reverso, and then you compare and critically analyze it with the human translation. I have given you similar exercises. I think 2 exercises in for you people that you have done, and I think the basic idea is clear. But here, what I am targeting is the critical analysis. Critically analyze means if you take one lexical item for your comparison and analysis, go into the details. And by details, I mean go into the detail of the original lexical item, etymology, different meanings, shades, and why that, and how this has been used in the original text for which meaning. So you provide all this in your analysis, and then you compare this with the human translation of human and then the machine translation with the same information or with the same of course pattern that you would have already done in the original text. I think this, if it is not clear here, this can be discussed face to face during face to face class. Select one or two only from the following, because I said in the previous that I need you people to do the critical analysis based on your comparison. So I would also confine your effort to one or two your items from the following. One is lexical items. You may select only lexical items for your comparison and analysis. You don't need to be very ambitious to include each and everything, because the purpose here is not the coverage or the wide coverage. The purpose is that you learn how to compare, and analyze critically these things. Or you may select terminology, or you may select lexical items and terminology, but not more than two. You may select grammar and structure only, or maybe grammar structure with lexical items or terminology. You may select culturally bound expressions only, or maybe you can combine it with one of the previous or the following items. Fluency is another area of comparison analysis. Punctuations is also a very important area of comparison and analysis. Here I have mentioned 2 theories as well, on the assumption that you have gone through these theories or you know them. If you know them, if you have studied these 2 theories in the area of translation studies, is equivalence and the shifts. And as you know, equivalence, many scholars, they have different categories of equivalence, and the shifts also the same. So you can select one of those theories for your comparison analysis. But remember, if you have not studied these theories, don't touch them. You can take these linguistic items, 2 items, as I am emphasizing again, time and again, that do not be ambitious. Do not try to include many items. One item, but with deep analysis. And as I said, the deep analysis, how a single word has been translated and why it has not been translated with the different alternative words or suggestions, and they are available in the dictionaries. The presentation and the written docs, that is there will be individual PPT presentation in the class, and we shall be deciding the schedule inshallah on Tuesday, tomorrow, who is going to present when. And of course this is oral presentation, and then your work, you will be sending me your work in written form, in Word and PDF format. And do not, please do not send me PPT. In the past I have seen people that they just present whatever they present inside the classroom. They send me, I need a well written document uh, from you people, and you can email me. You better email me. I don't need hard copies, but well written, well prepared, as I have given you a suggested format as well and elements of that format in the previous slides. You can discuss more with me about the format or the elements that should be included in your presentation or in your written doc. I hope this part is clear. So with this we can move on to our next point, which is the approaches for the development of machine translation and issues and challenges. Our presentation is based on an article that I have included in the reading material of the book that you have in your hand, and I hope you have gone through this article. Before I start, I would like to repeat what I said once, I think in one of the early lectures, that when we talk about the approaches or methods for the development of machine translation, actually this area belongs to software engineering, machine area, the development of machine area. As for the scholars or the students of translation studies, the other part is very much relevant, and we know better the details of that other part, that is the translation or translated text, and how to compare and how to evaluate and how to talk about the quality of machine translation. And so hence we see the issues and challenges. Mostly you will feel that the issues and challenges mostly are described in a way which of course are mostly related to software engineers or the area of software engineering. Having said that, we should also try to understand what we can understand, how these systems are developed, what kind of orientation we should have, kind of orientation uh, for uh, for these approaches, and the methods, the techniques that are used for preparing these machine translation platforms, systems, applications, and so on and so forth. Let's first try to just ponder on the keywords mentioned in this title. Although we know translation, of course we know machine translation also, but these are the words that I think we need to talk about. Approach. By approach we mean structured system for generating a linguistic output on the basis of another linguistic input. So on the one side there is a linguistic input. In our terminology we call this source language or source text, and then on the other side, the delivery side, is another linguistic output. We call it target language or target text. But in between there is this structured system for generating this linguistic process, whereas there is an input and which generates the output. By issues we mean the hurdles coming in the way of any approach using that approach, and by challenges, what motivates the MT developers to overcome hurdles. And with this quick explanation, I hope now the title of this presentation is more understandable. Different authors, various scholars have categorized these approaches in different way. But I think the best approach, or I mean the best category, for us at least, as I said, we are non-technical people. We do not belong to the area of software engineering. Is this one? There are two major categories: rule-based machine translation approach (RBMT), and then corpus-based machine translation approach, which is CBMT. If you read this topic, categories of approaches, you will find that different people use different epistemological foundation for the categorization of these approaches. So don't be confused. I think we should stick to these two main categories, along with their, of course, subcategories that will be discussed subsequently. Before going into the details, just have a quick look on the sub-approaches or subcategories of this RBMT, rule-based machine translation. There are three subcategories or sub-approaches. Direct machine translation approach, which is known as DMT, and then transfer-based machine translation approach, which is TBMT, and then interlingual machine translation approach, which is IMT. So MT, I think, is in these abbreviated form is MT is machine translation, and then RB and TB, and then I, which is direct machine translation, transfer-based machine translation, and then Interlingua or interlingual machine translation approach. But first, the concept. What do we mean by rule-based machine translation approach? By rules, we mean the two things basically, but predominantly one, which is the linguistic rules. Rules specified by human expert to describe the translation process. And the rules are related to, as I said, mainly to linguists, or the linguistic rule, or the translation rules from one language to another. And then software engineers, they also set the rules for the development of a certain system. This rule-based machine translation approach, also known as knowledge-based machine translation or classical machine translation approach. Nowadays, knowledge-based machine translation and classical machine translation approach, these terminologies are almost obsolete or not used in the literature. The most dominant terminology or word is rule-based machine translation approach. So the word rule, as I said, predominantly means language rules based on linguistic information and analysis of SL and TL. Linguistic information, as we all know, because this is our area, we deal with the language and languages, so we know there are sounds, the phonetic information, there are words, the morphological information, there are sentences and the syntactic information, and there is meaning, that is the semantic, and then of course every language is also essential part of a culture, so there are cultural information as well in the source text or the target language or target text. So this is the concept embedded in this term rule-based machine translation approach. I would ask you to just focus on the word rule, and then of course machine translation approaches rest should be clear. But the rule-based mean the rules of the languages SL or TL. And also software engineers, they also set some rules for the as for the development of any system, machine translation system. The basic principles or phases in the rule-based machine translation approach, that the analysis of the SL and TL languages. As I said, the analysis, by analysis we are talking about the linguistic analysis, and then transfer of SL analysis, and then generation of target language based on SL transfer. So logically the phases, they look simple, that in the first instance the source language is analyzed, and then it is it is fed into the structured system, and then transfer of the source language, which is already analyzed with this analysis, is provided to the analysis of the target language, and hence a translation is generated. As I said earlier, when I was talking about this last line, second last line is linguistic information. Now we have a little bit detail of this, that source text morphological analyzer. Of course, this analyzer, when we come to the analyzer, is the machine part developed by the software engineering or the computer science. Part of speech tagger, these are the terms used in computer science. Analyzer in this morphological analyzer or tagger, part of speech tagger. You just imagine that we are doing it manually, but it is done by machine and an automatic process based on some rules, computer rules, or based on some computer programming. And then lexical selection, and how the lexical selection is the lexical transfer with the structural transfer, they work hand in hand because there's always overlapping. Then the morphological generator, which is now on the part of the translator, and post generated text, target text and the target text. I mean, this is just a very simple depiction of what happens inside the machine. We can have a good analogy of this, what happens inside the machine, human brain. How do we learn a foreign language? We learn words first, of course, and then we learn the grammatical rules, the words, and then we learn the morphological rules and so on and so for the usage. And then when it comes to translate from one language to another, we of course pass through a similar, not the same process, but a similar process. And I'm talking about our system, the Pakistani system, and I'm sure the Chinese, when they learn a foreign language, a second language, even the Thai, when they learn foreign language, second language, they also use the same method. Although nowadays direct method of language learning is is very much popular, but the grammar, the grammatical details, the sentence structure, the morphological information, the lexical orientation is essential part of language learning programs here and there, almost everywhere. I know directly that the German, when they learn second language or foreign language, they mostly rely on the rules, the grammar, the structure, or other elements of the language. An example here is presented. An example is a girl eats an apple, and we will see that in the next slide that it is translated into Arabic. So number one is e-dictionary, which map each English word to an appropriate Arabic word. The word map means match, which create a relation or matching of each original word, which is A is linked to a word in Arabic, girl is linked to a word in Arabic, and so on. Then rules representing regular English sentence structure. What are the rules here? The subject, verb, object rules. Rule representing regular Arabic sentence structure. And then rules according to which one can relate these two structures together and in that particular context. So after providing all these rules, with the help of a software or some machine working system, we can have this kind of functioning inside the machine. For example, a morphological A, at the morphological level, A is without al in Arabic. The A is, of course, there is no translation, rather there is omission of al if we want to translate A. And then the word girl, which means bint, and eats mean ta'kulu, verb, and then an also without l is omission. So then the word apple is tufaha. Then the rules representing the structure in English: S, subject, verb, object arrangement, and then the verb, subject, object arrangement in Arabic. And hence we get this translation: girl eats an apple is ta'kulu bintun tufahatan. And we see that bint is without al and tufaha is also without al because of a girl, and then an apple. In this way the rules are applied to get this translation on the basis of this approach, which is rule-based machine translation approach. Before going to the issues related to RBMT, I would just repeat what we have seen, what I have said in the previous slides. Remember one thing: the concept is here. It is that we try to deal with the linguistic rules of the source and the target languages, and then we try to work tediously to set these rules or feed these rules in the mind of the machine with the help of the software techniques, software development techniques, and hence we have this automatic or machine translation, translated text. This is the basic of RBMT. The main issues related to rule-based machine translation approach, that the insufficient amount of really good dictionaries. Rule-based machine translation approach basically relies heavily on electronic dictionaries, so this is an issue. The second issue is building new dictionaries is expensive. The cost aspect is very, very important. Some linguistic information still needs to be set manually, or you cannot. So far the experience or the experiments that have taken place in this area, they tell us that some linguistic information still needs to be set manually, because just take the example of omission of a. So it's not all the time that where there is a in English, it should be translated with the omission of al. Sometimes it is opposite. It is hard to deal with rule interactions in big systems, of course. If we have more translation tasks with the big system, so it is very hard to deal with the rule. Ambiguity and idiomatic expressions is another issue in rule-based machine translation approach, and difficulties and costs to adapt to new domains. Of course, the human language is a dynamic phenomenon, never ending. It is changing, it is enhancing, it is changing its shape, direction. vocabulary and many other aspects, language aspects, is very evident. We see everyday use that is happening. So it is very difficult, and also it's very costly to adapt to new domains. Technological advancements are there, the advancement in the area of thinking, human thinking, the literature, and so on. So adapting to these emerging areas is not easy job. With this, we can move with the understanding of, I hope, inshallah, understanding of the basic concept of RBMT. We can move to the sub approaches of RBMT. So as I have shown you previously the slide where we have seen this DMT, direct machine translation approach, and then transfer based machine translation approach, and then Interlingua or interlingual machine translation approach. So we are going to talk about these three with the help of this. You can see from the down direct translation, where on the left side the source text and on the right side is the target text. And if we move little up, we see the transfer approach where the analysis is also very much obvious. We can see the analysis there, and then the generation. But if we go into the top of this pyramid, we see the Interlingua. So the analysis is heading towards the Interlingua, and then we get the generation, which is the target text, which is the target text of this approach. Now I repeat it here. If you see the in the direct approach, the arrow is directly going to the target text. But if we see the transfer approach, we see the analysis is there, and then we have the generation. But the interlingual translation, machine translation approach, we have analysis, but this analysis is fed into an interlingua, and that interlingua generates the translation in the target text, target language. With this very quick and brief description, I think we can go into a little bit textual details. Direct machine translation approach is the oldest and less popular approach nowadays. It was very popular, and here I would like to relate the brief history of machine translation to this approach. In the beginning, in 1950s, early 1950s, the scientists and the developers, they used this approach, and they had a very high hope of this approach, that this approach will produce very good results. It is actually a very simple approach. Direct translation is made at the word level only. It is very similar to the electronic dictionaries, with a little bit, of course, input as for the structures or the grammatical rules of the source and the target languages are concerned. Words of the source languages are translated without passing through an intermediary representation. This intermediary representation needs some explanation, and actually this is related to Interlingua, as you have seen this here at the top, Interlingua, and I will explain this Interlingua after some time. So intermediate representation is not needed as far as the DMT is concerned. Systems are basically bilingual and unidirectional. Of course, direct machine translation, the scope is very limited, so there can be only two languages, not more than that. And unidirectional means from one language to another, for example from Arabic into English, and not vice versa. So unidirectional, so one direction. DMT approach needs only a little syntactic and semantic analysis. In some cases, and in the early stages of the machine translation development, actually there was no syntactic and semantic analysis, but then people started including the syntactic grammatical rules also of the SL and TL to improve the translation quality. The challenges of the DMT, it's a limited approach. So word for word is just like, was very similar to word for word translation by humans. The low quality translation, simple knowledge of the morphology, very simple knowledge, maybe not exceeding the division of the word into noun, pronoun, and verb or kinds of verb, not more than that. Frequent mistranslations at the lexical level is also a challenge, and largely inappropriate syntax structures are very much evident as for this DMT is concerned. So it's a challenge in front of the developers. But I would like to tell you that no approach is obsolete so far, although this is the oldest approach, and although this is the very simple approach, and although this was the beginning of machine translation development in early 1950s. But even then, I believe that DMT is still very much relevant for certain purposes. And I would quote here the analogy of human translation. The word-for-word translation for classroom purposes is very much relevant. So if we want to train the developers for the development of machine translation systems, I think we can start with this DMT. And sometimes people do not need correct translation; they just need the meaning, what has been said in the text. And here the DMT direct machine translation approach at least can help. It depends on the volume of text to be translated, on the purpose of translation, and on those users of the translation. What is the type of users that would use the translation based on DMT. With this, we can move on to transfer-based machine translation approach, which is TBMT, and there are three different stages. One is the analysis, the other is the transfer, and then the generation. Source language parser is used to produce the syntactic representation of sentence. The difference between this and the previous approach is this: the source language parser is used, and for that, the understanding of the parser, we can see this slide. The sentence is divided into this the phrases, and the phrases are divided into word. And of course, this is a very, very simple example of the parser, but the detailed parsers are very complex. It's noun phrases, the article and the noun and the verb is 8, but you can divide the verb into more. You can do more parsing of the verb as well, and also the noun as well, and then you can also relate the underlying relate them you can create underlying relationship among these segments of this sentence or other sentence. Is a very simple sentence, and in the natural language we have very complex sentences depending upon the topic and the writer and the speaker and so on. The rat ate cheese. Anyway, this is one very simple example of the parser. So the analysis. After the analysis, this is the transfer. The result of the first stage, which is the SL parser, is converted into equivalent TL oriented representations. And then the generation, TL morphological analyzer. This analyzer, as I said earlier, morphological analyzer is a technical term used in the area of computational linguistics. So morphological analyzer is used to generate the final target language text. This is rule-based machine translation approach. Okay, what are the challenges that are faced by the developers of transfer-based machine translation approach? Is the rules SL and TL must be applied at every step of translation. SL rules for transfer and TL rules for generation. Difficulty in keeping the rules up to the mark. The challenges that we have, or the issues that we have seen previously in DMT, can also be discussed here in a different, of course, at a different level, not the same level. Because here most of the challenges are, at the level of analyzing and generating the translation. And analyzing the structure, the rules of the structure of the grammar is something which is, if we do manually, we can understand the difficulties. The interlingual machine translation approach within the rule-based machine translation approach, one of the categories of rule-based machine translation approach is at the top of this pyramid that we have seen. Interlingua. You see these from the direct to the transfer, from the transfer to the interlingua. This was the these can be considered the developmental phases in the history of machine translation development. The interlingua was the idea that there must be something which plays the role of intermediary role for the translation. So the source language is transformed into an interlingual language. The source language is transformed into an interlingual language. What is interlingua? Before I say that, let's see what is interlingua. Interlingua is an artificial language independent of any natural language that makes explicit the distinction necessary for successful translation into a target language. We can say that the Interlingua is a program which understands many languages and knows how to transfer those languages into some other many languages. You can see here in the point number 2 that mostly used for Romance languages. Of course, this is because it was developed for the sake of Romance languages, but nowadays the Interlingua available nowadays, they are of course used for other languages as well, because and basically it was designed primarily for the scientific and technical use, Interlingua. So the use of the Interlingua in the area of computational linguistics and software engineering is something which is multi-purposes, but here for the sake of translation, machine translation, this was the idea was floated, and people started developing good interlingua for the translation of more than one language. So interlingual language is a neutral representation that is independent of any natural language. The target language is then generated out of the interlingua, not directly but through interlingua. And this approach is attractive for multilingual systems. And the previous two categories, that is the direct machine translation and transfer-based machine translation, they were very limited as for the number of languages are concerned. But with the help of the interlingua, the number of languages were enhanced for the translation purpose. Most important challenges faced by the developers of this subcategory of rule-based machine translation, namely interlingual machine translation approaches, are these. Difficulties in defining an interlingua. It is always very difficult to define an interlingua, even for closely related languages, e.g. Romance languages. Not very easy. A truly universal and language-independent interlingua has not been possible. Interlingua, this approach brought, of course, betterment in machine translation at its time, and it was after the LPEC report that we have discussed earlier in the previous lecture when we discussed the brief history of machine translation. And people thought that Interlingua will solve our problems, but the subsequent years proved that even this technique did not solve many problems. So with this, we end our lecture where we have discussed two things: your project and also the machine translation approaches. And we have today discussed three subcategories of one major category of machine translation approaches, which is rule-based machine translation. And the remaining main category, and its subcategories, and also another neural-based machine translation will be discussed in the coming lecture, inshallah. And mind you, the topic of neural machine translation is not included in this article or even in this book, but I shall try to provide you some written papers as well for your record, for your, of course, reference and for your further reading. But I will discuss about neural translation with the corpus-based machine translation system. Thank you very much for being with me. Today I tried to be very slow in my talk, in my, of course, delivery of the sentences, purposefully, because the topic, as I said, is very technical and mainly is not our field, is related to software engineering. So I try to slow my pace, my speaking pace, and resultantly, of course, this also, I also fumbled in during couple of moments, because you are trying to, of course, restrict your thinking, and you are trying to, of course, adjust your physical delivery, whereas the mind speed and the physical delivery speed. So there is always is a difference, and this difference caused this. Anyways, the purpose, if you have understood this, fine. If you of course you must have questions, we will discuss them tomorrow. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.